welcome back to our last segment of Conference Live here at RealCom 2017. It has been an incredible show, and we've had fabulous guests, but I must say I am partial to believing that we are saving the best for last. These next 5 interviews are with leaders in our industry, and I'm here joined with the ever-popular Scott Morey from GPG. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. So, let's talk trends. Let's talk what this show was really about. We're winding down. We've got the last few hours left. What's really happening? What's really the trend, the emerging story from RealCom?
You know, it's interesting because it's almost what's not happening, which sounds so funny to say in the scheme of things. But the impact and role that technology is playing and the influence it has is stronger today than it's ever been. And we could talk about it in any asset class, right? So whether we're talking about retail, which gets the most press, but we could talk about logistics, industrial effect, we could talk about office, you know, we could talk about multifamily. So I think the collective space is in an inflection point. And I think having come to RealCom, I think it's a 20-year anniversary this next year, right? Yeah. And for years, I would argue that technology was underplayed within this space. And I think the individuals that have been a part of it, and this forum being a very sort of, you know, productive platform for the discussion around it, are at a juncture in time that is really allowing us to take those skills and use them in unique ways.
You know, at the keynote, apparently someone said, you know, technology is moving at 200 miles an hour, and real estate only 25 miles an hour, something like that. I look around the floor. We have got Dell behind me with edge sensors that can tell you how many people are standing in this room. We've got people walking around with apps on their phone that can evaluate portfolios. I don't think it's actually moving that slowly.
But I would argue, or not, I agree with you, doomsday sells.
Yeah, right.
Like the Armageddon,
You're all
the world's
behind.
ending, you gotta do it, right, in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's not to say that there's not a lot of opportunity, because there is, you know. So it's interesting, like earlier today, we had a conversation, I moderated a panel actually that was about the industrial logistics people and retail, and it's fascinating. And you look at the statistics, for example, where online orders where effectively you're picking by item, right?
Right.
The demand for industrial space has gone up 4-fold. It makes sense, because if I'm moving boxes to stores versus I'm in a warehouse picking an item, and the dichotomy between that, which is driven by technology because of online sales, right? But about how then the retail owner-operators with retailers respond to that, right? So there's a huge amount of opportunity, but I think if you go over the last 12 months and you go 3 or 5 years back, it's night and day. Like, we're chugging along, and I think we're doing it at a decent pace, but you know, there's always more you can do.
What are some of the things that you are advising your clients to do now that maybe 2 years ago you weren't so sure about or wasn't even on your radar? What are the smart things that you're telling your clients?
Well, think about, well, a couple things. I would say generically, when you and I talked last 2 years ago when I was at General Growth, you know, I've made a career out of looking at pennies, dimes, and nickels of earnings per share. And I'd say GPG Advisors, and there's other firms like us kind of do the same thing. But, you know, if you look historically, and I'll answer your question now, is very much that was very P&L focused, but very expense driven. And technology and systems, probably not just within the real estate industry, but across a bunch of industries, was always very internally focused. And now we talk about digital. You talk about chief digital officers and talk about innovation, and what does it really mean in the end? And to me, it's literally like you're going from expense-driven to revenue, which is tactical, could be in some ways. So if we said I was in multifamily example, right? I had housing and I had apartments. Well, there's more services people, the landlords are providing as part of that, right? And there might be revenue with that. But think about how that space is being completely reinvented in the establishment communities. Look at office and rework. What is WeWork at the end of the day? It's a digital play, right? But the difference is it's going from internal enterprise company, like if you and I owned a real estate company, traditionally it was very inward looking. The last 2 years, for a number of reasons, one, you know, because technology's advanced to levels that make sense, but also the market dynamics are changing, right?
Yeah.
Where it's now becoming very externally, you know, about how do I establish communities, how do I create brand, how do I create awareness in Google, how do I, that's the shift really, right? And it has strategic implications, you know, for companies. Right. It's not just about, okay, I can make a little bit more revenue or I can save a bunch in expense. It's now I got to navigate a landscape I haven't navigated before, because there's these people coming out of nowhere with these really interesting, unique plays, like WeWork or some other ones, is an example we talked about, and I got to figure out how to respond to that. And I'd say fundamentally, probably even more so the last year, but certainly the last 2 or 3 years, it's night and day. So a lot of people that are in this room or maybe listening to this, they're getting asked by their CEO these questions, or they may be bringing in someone else above them when I argue actually, IT people are used to solving things they haven't solved before.
Right.
It's a competency we have.
Yeah.
Historically it's been IT, but we have the ability to do it in other ways. And so now you're finding CIOs that are picking up marketing, innovation, these other categories, because it's getting going from more internal enterprise, expense-driven to much more external stakeholders in total for companies, and how do we move the company forward in a strategic way.
It's interesting because it seems to be happening in every single area. We were talking to Sandy Jackalow yesterday. He was talking about how it used to be the tenant.
Correct.
Now it's the customer.
Correct.
And we're worrying about a whole scope of things in that area. Are there enough amenities? Are they connected? How are they
have an
eating?
app. Yeah. They have an amazing app,
Yeah.
and right. I mean, you look at that as a great example in housing. That wasn't even thought of before, right?
Right.
I mean, it's really interesting actually. In every category, I mean, the only one that's a different dynamic is industrial. It's not that it's not changing. Its definition of tenant is different, right? But you take all the other categories, if we have hospitality, retail, and office, and multifamily, it's very dynamic, and whether it's an app or something, right? And in fact, you're touching someone either via an app or some kind of mobile type tool, or directly within the space itself, right? Whether it's a smart, whatever it is, smart building, smart office, smart store.
So, I mean, have we basically imprisoned ourselves? Because what has happened is we have more technology, now we have to do more things for people. The expectation on every level. Oh, you're there in my company? Well, now I want you to market me to the internet, and I also want you to brand me, and I also want this. You can't just sell properties, and you can't just lease them anymore. And the people we lease them to, they want you to give them Wi-Fi and food and snacks and rides. And on every level, you even go to a retail space yourself, and you go, do you guys have Wi-Fi? Isn't there anything to drink? We have become so demanding. So is that the end game that all this technology that was supposed to help us has made us into everyone's nanny?
Oh, wow, that's interesting. And a nanny, it's a very specific word, right? I mean, you could look at other parallels. Let's go on a tangent and talk about movie theaters.
Okay.
And talk about, 20 years ago, a little bit less than that, probably 15, the death of movie theaters.
Right.
And there's more movie theaters today than there were then.
So why?
Well, in a way, I think because there's still value in the connection, the physical connection in the community, and a joint experience, right? Now, in order to do that, though, you look at movie theaters, they still did other things, right? Like, for example, I'm in Chicago.
Yeah.
We talk about a movie, I'm focused on reserved seats, comfortable seats, and right or wrong, do they serve beer?
Yep.
But it's become a criteria, really, right? But they're doing it, if you think about it, everything they're doing is still getting a return. Are ticket prices up in movie theaters? It's crazy the amount of money you pay, right? In the scheme of things. So if there's value, you get compensated in the end.
Yeah.
And so I don't think there's anything out there that's going to last that doesn't have an effective return. And a nanny implies a burden to me, at least the way that you worded. No offense to anyone that was or is a nanny.
Sure.
But I think all those things, when you really peel them back, there's return on the capital spent on those items.
Right.
And you're getting compensated in the end. And if you're not, you're cutting those things because they add no value, because the consumer doesn't really appreciate it, and you move on.
Do you think that it's the technology driving that, or are we just changing as humans? We just demand more?
I think it's circular, actually, to be honest with you, right?
More ability to serve, more
Correct.
demand for service.
It feeds itself, and now the speed of change is higher and quicker than ever. So,
as we wrap up, is there anything that the real estate world needs to know about you or what's going on with GPG?
Fascinating, very specific question. No, I think it's an amazing time to be in this space. I think we're very fortunate company to be doing the things we're doing. We have a long-term play going back to the previous comment where if we can add value, we're happy to add value in any way. And we recognize over time if we do that, then things will go well for us. So if we can do well for our clients, we do well for ourselves, and everybody's happy.
Scott, thank you so much.
Thank
pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Scott Morey, Executive Director of GPG Advisors.